Hello and welcome back to Neo-Psychology with me, your teacher, Mr. Neo, the channel where I teach psychology lessons to my wonderful students. Today we are continuing with localization of function. We are doing lesson 2, localization of function, evaluation. Let's get started, shall we? There we go. We are starting with the starter. What better place, as I said before. We did this activity last lesson, but let's see if you can remember the answers. Using your knowledge of localization of function, where in the brain can the following areas be located? So you've got auditory cortex, Broca's area, motor cortex, somatosensory cortex, the visual cortex, and vernix area. Where can these be found? Have a little go if you want, draw the diagram, or just do it in your head. I don't mind. Give the video a pause if you want to give it a go, because I'm about to go through the answers. Let's have a look, shall we? So, let's start with the auditory cortex. Where's that going to be found? Which lobe? The temporal lobe. Well done. Auditory lobe. The auditory cortex is found in the temporal lobe. Yes. Next one, Broca's area. Which lobe is that found in? The frontal lobe. Very good, well done. Motor cortex is also found in the frontal lobe towards the back, which borders the parietal lobe. Next to the motor area is the somatosensory area, or the somatosensory cortex, which is on the parietal lobe. The occipital lobe is important for visual. It's about seeing things. It's about understanding the visual things that our eyes can see, so that is in the occipital lobe. And the vernix area is actually found in the temporal lobe, as well as the auditory. There we go. What are our learning objectives of today? Show comprehension and apply knowledge of the curious case of Phineas Gage, and then learning objective 2, to be able to discuss and evaluate localization of function in the brain. It's always important to analyze, discuss, and evaluate. Let's get started on learning objective 1. The curious case of Phineas Gage. Oh, it sounds mysterious. It sounds cool, like it's some sort of film. The mysterious case. The curious case of Phineas Gage. Not mysterious. Maybe it is a little bit as well. Phineas. You don't find people called Phineas anymore, do you? Phineas and Ferb is what I'm thinking, but pretty cool name, Phineas. There we go. The curious case of Phineas Gage. Whilst working on the railroad in 1848, 25-year-old Phineas Gage was preparing to blast a section of rock with explosives to create a new railway line. During the process, Gage dropped his tampering iron onto the rock, causing the explosive to ignite. The explosion hurled the meter-length pole through Gage's left eye, through Gage's left cheek, passing behind his left eye and exiting his skull. From the top of his head, taking a portion of his brain with it, most of his left frontal lobe. Incredibly, this is Phineas Gage, Gage survived, but the damage to his brain had left a mark on his personality. Not a physical thing, it affected his personality. Taking a chunk of your brain, you might not think that that might affect your personality, but this is what was found. By all accounts, he had turned from someone who was calm and reserved to someone who was now quick-tempered, rude, and, quotes, no longer Gage. Gage is seen as a landmark case in science, as the change in his temperament and his personality following the accident suggests that the frontal lobe may be responsible for regulating mood. So that's how he came to a conclusion as well. This supports the idea of localization of function. Oh, well, essentially, the guy had a part of his frontal lobe cut out, and it affected his personality. Did it affect everything else? No, not everything. It affected some things, but it shows that certain parts of the brain affect certain areas and not all areas, which is contrary to the holistic theory that the whole brain affects everything. No. Right, watch this video about what really happened to Phineas Gage, right? Check out the video, click on the picture or the link, and it should take you to the video. 7-minute video, 7 to 8 minute video, and it will give you a bit more detail about what happened to Phineas Gage and what we have learnt from this. Here's a question. Number 1. Does the case of Phineas Gage support localization theory or holistic theory, and why does it support it? And the extension is, why is it difficult to draw general conclusions from the case of Gage? Why is it difficult to draw general conclusions? Give that a go now. Let's have a look. Question 1. Does the case of Phineas Gage support localization theory or holistic theory? Why? I did go into this briefly, and here's a long answer. The specific changes observed in his behavior support theories about the localization of brain function, or the idea that certain functions are associated with specific areas of the brain. The part of the brain damaged in the accident was the area of the frontal cortex associated with planning, reasoning, and control. Gage's personality changed from him being a mild-mannered to a rude and hostile person. Today, scientists better understand the role that the frontal cortex has to play in important higher-order functions such as reasoning, language, and social cognition. In those years, while neurology was in its infancy, neurology, which is the study of the brain, Gage's extraordinary story served as one of the first sources of evidence that the frontal lobe was involved in personality. This is one of the first things that happened, because how many times does someone has a chunk of their brain cut out and somehow they survive, right? This guy survived, Phineas Gage survived, and we found, it affected his personality. Therefore, that part of the brain that was affected, or the chunk of brain that came out with the rod, that meter-long rod, affected his personality. It wasn't the fact that he'd been hit by this rod that made him more angry. It was an actual physical change in his personality. And then extension question. Why is it difficult to draw conclusions or draw general conclusions from the case of Gage? It is difficult to generalize from the case of Phineas Gage, as he is one individual, so all other people might not react or show the changes that he did following such an incident, right? We can't generalize the findings. Generalize the findings mean, can we apply what we found to Phineas Gage to the rest of the world, to other people? Can we apply it? Maybe we can, maybe we can't. The thing is, when it's only a one person, it's a one person study, it's a Phineas Gage, how do we know that that's going to be the same thing that happens to other people? There might be thousands of other people that if this happened to, nothing happened to their personality. The point is, we don't know. He suffered from an infection as a result of the injury, so it could have been this which damaged the brain, further, or the fact that he had significant scarring could have changed the way people treated him and thus affected how he acted. If a person today suffered the same injury, they may not display the same behaviours as Gage. Yes, that's true. So there's difficult to draw conclusions from a case study of one person of Phineas Gage. It's difficult to generalise the findings. So, identify one thing you learned about the curious case of Phineas Gage. What was one thing you learned? Why do you think learning about the case of Phineas Gage is important? The case of Phineas Gage comes up in psychology again and again and again. If you decide to go and do it in further education, you'll find it at university, you find it at master's level, at doctorate level, wherever. It comes up again and again. How does the curious case of Phineas Gage apply in real life? How is this helpful? How is this useful to us? And then what questions has the curious case of Phineas Gage raised for you? What are you still wondering about? You got any questions? Write them down. There we go. Learning objective 1. Show comprehension and apply knowledge of the curious case of Phineas Gage. I think we all know, we're all familiar with Phineas Gage now. So let's tick that one off. Ching. Let's move on to learning objective 2. To be able to discuss and evaluate localization of function in the brain. Evaluation AO3. What are some of the strengths and weaknesses of localization of function in the brain? What are some of the strengths? What are some of the weaknesses with this theory? Brain scan evidence of localization. there is a wealth of evidence providing support for the idea that many neurological functions are localized, particularly in relation to language and memory. For instance, Peterson et al. In 1988 used brain scans to demonstrate how Wernicke's area was active during a listening task and Broca's area was active during a reading task, suggesting that these areas of the brain have different functions. Similarly, a study of long-term memory by Tolvin et al. Revealed that semantic and episodic memories reside in different parts of the prefrontal cortex. There now exist a number of highly sophisticated and objective methods for measuring activities in the brain, which provide sound scientific evidence for localization of brain function. Now, is this a strength or is this a weakness? This is a strength because it's evidence supporting the idea that localization of function is a thing. There's lots of evidence from brain scans that show, yeah, actually, if you give them an activity, it shows that a specific part of their brain was being activated, therefore, their brain activity is localized. We've got another evaluative point. Neurosurgical evidence. The practice of surgically removing or destroying areas of the brain to control aspects of behavior developed in the 1950s. Early attempts, such as those pioneered by Walter Freeman, who developed the lobotomy, were brutal and imprecise and typically involved severing connections in the frontal lobe in an attempt to control aggressive behavior. So a lobotomy is physically opening up the brain and cutting bits out. It was done in very, very severe cases, usually individuals with mental health and those that are physically dangerous, and they thought this was a way of dealing with the problem. Cut a chunk of their brain out, and that would, look, they're no longer aggressive anymore. Problem solved. Well, yeah, but they're essentially brain dead as well. Controversially, neurosurgery is still used today, albeit sparingly, in extreme cases of obsessive compulsive disorder and depression. For example, Doherty et al. Reported on 44 OCD patients who had undergone a cingulotomy, a neurosurgical procedure that involves lesioning of the cingulate gyrus. A post-surgical follow-up after 32 weeks, a third had met the criteria for successful response to the surgery and 14% of partial response. The success of procedures like this strongly suggests that symptoms and behaviors associated with serious mental disorders are localized. So, is this a strength or a weakness? This is a strength because there's more evidence suggesting that yes, parts of the brain are localized and different parts of the brain have different functions. Lashley's research. The work of Carl Lashley suggests that higher cognitive functions, such as the processes involved in learning, are not localized but distributed in a more holistic way in the brain. Lashley removed areas of the cortex, so between 10 and 50% in rats that were learning a maze. No area was proven to be more important than any other in terms of the rat's ability to learn the maze. The process of learning appeared to require every part of the cortex, rather than being confined to a particular area. This seems to suggest that learning is too complex to be localized and requires the involvement of the whole brain. So, is this a strength or a weakness? This is a weakness of localization of the function, because Lashley's research, albeit with rats, found that the rat needed the entire of its brain, the whole of its brain, in order to learn. And this is contrary to what localization of function, which suggests, you need a specific localized area of the brain to learn, whereas this found that the rat needed the whole brain to learn. On the other hand, you could argue that, however, is this research really generalizable because it's been done with a rat and not on humans? Possibly, possibly not. Here's a question. Lashley's work was conducted using animals, rats. Explain why this means we should be cautious in drawing conclusions related to human learning. I've somewhat answered that question just now. Answer. As Lashley's work is based on animals, specifically rats, it may be inappropriate to assume that humans learn in the same way and that the human brain stores learned information in every part of the cortex. Animals and humans are qualitatively different creatures, with humans possessing consciousness, so it may be inappropriate to generalize the findings. Right? It's a really good point. You use this in your essays, right? However, research contrary to localization of function of brain done by Lashley suggests that rats needed the whole of their brain to learn. However, it may not be generalizable to humans because a rat's brain is a lot less complex and has a lot less cerebral cortex than a human's brain. That being said, a rat is a mammal and therefore is similar to and is similar than other animals potentially. On the other hand, there is evidence that the human can function despite the loss of areas of the cortex. The neurosurgeon John Lorber was asked to assess a young man in good health. When Lorber looked at the CAT scans, he found that the man's brain was a thinner smear around the skull and the bulk of his head contained spinal fluid. According to all theories of brain structure, the man should not have been alive. But not only was he alive, he had a degree in maths and economics. Lorber went on to scan more than 600 people with hydrocephalus, an excess fluid-filled ventricles in the brain, and found numerous cases where the ventricles were filled with more than 50% of the head with fluid. So it showed that... I don't know what it shows. Plasticity. A further and compelling argument against localization of function is the notion of cortical remapping or plasticity. When the brain has become damaged, say through illness or accident, and a particular function had been compromised or lost, the rest of the brain appeared to be able to reorganize itself in an attempt to recover the loss of function. Lashley described this as the law of equipotentiality, whereby surviving brain circuits chip in so the same neurological actions can be achieved. Although this does not happen every time, there are several documented cases of stroke victims being able to recover those lost abilities that were seemingly lost as a result of the illness. Now, brain plasticity is something we're going to look at next lesson. Essentially what it is if you were to lose a certain part of your brain that was localized to, say, a specific action, like, just to say, for example, walking. Oh, this section of the brain is localized to help you with your movements and walking. This part has been damaged, and you've lost that part of your ability to walk now. Those individuals, they can learn to walk again if they keep trying, because other sections of the brain have been helping out. Go, yeah, we're not the movement section, but we can still help you. And that's what they've been found of brain plasticity. So, is this a strength or a weakness? This is a weakness because it's suggesting, well, actually, it's not specific areas of the brain that are required to deal with a certain psychological or certain physical movements or actions. Actually, other parts of the brain can also help out. Explain how the apparent plasticity of the brain lends support to holistic rather than localization theory. Here's the answer. The plasticity of the brain lends support to the holistic theory because people who damage part of their brain through, for example, having a stroke, or it might be a physical thing, like someone's physically hit you on the brain and damaged part of your brain, they are able to recover function, or they might be able to recover function that has been lost. So basically, another part of the brain takes over the function. The brain physically adjusts the location of function if damage occurs, which suggests that localization is not fixed to a specific area. The brain is working as a whole unit rather than specific areas of specific functions. Here's a question. Outline one strength and one weakness of localization of function in the brain. 4 marks, right? Answer the question in a peel paragraph structure, right? Give your point, evidence, explain it, and then link it back to the question. Point, evidence, explanation, link. Peel paragraph structure, right? As a challenge, can you think of any further criticisms of your own using the grave and scout technique? There we go. Identify one important thing you learned from the evaluation. Why do you think learning about the evaluation is important, right? It's important to evaluate because research might be contradictory. You go, well, this research found this. Yeah, but on the other hand, this research found this evidence. So you can't always believe what one piece of research has found. How does the evaluation apply in real life? It helps us think more critically, right? Someone tells you a piece of research. Oh, I found a piece of research. Apparently chocolate makes you thinner. You go, really? That doesn't sound right. Right? You look at a piece of research and you evaluate it. Well, their methodology wasn't particularly good. Oh, they only used one person's sample or something like that. And then what questions has the evaluation raised for you? What are you still wondering about? There we go. So we've discussed and evaluated localization of function in the brain. Plenary. Oh, multiple choice questions. Let's see how we do. The theory, number 1. The theory that all parts of the brain are involved in the processing of thought and action is called what? A. Holistic theory. B. Localization theory. C. Plasticity. Or D. Law of equipotentiality. What do you reckon? A, B, C, or D? I'm not going to tell you till you answer. A? Good, well done. It's holistic theory because you're looking at the brain as a whole, all parts of the brain. Number 2. Broca's area is located in the A. Left parietal lobe. B. Right occipital lobe. C. Left frontal lobe. Or D. Left temporal lobe. Oh, we did this last lesson. What do you reckon? A, B, C, or D? I think it's on the left for sure, so that gets rid of B, and I believe it's in the frontal lobe. So I'm going to go C, left frontal lobe. Yes, I got it right, because I made the lesson. 3. Damage to which area of the brain may result in a loss of control of fine movements? Is it A, the somatosensory area, B, the motor area, C, the auditory area, or D, vernix area? Which area of the brain, which cortex is related to fine movements? I'm going to go with motor area. B. Yeah. Number 4. Most of the damage to Phineas Gage's brain was sustained in the A, frontal lobe, B, parietal lobe, C, temporal lobe, or D, occipital lobe. It's got to be the frontal lobe. It came through his left cheek up. So, frontal lobe. Yes. Number 5. The area or areas of the brain responsible for language is or are known as A, the motor cortex, B, the visual cortex, C, the somatosensory cortex, or B, Broca and vernix area. If you remember from last lesson, it is... That's right, D, Broca and vernix area. And the last one, number 6, connect the terms with the correct descriptions. We've got the motor area, we've got the visual area, we've got the somatosensory area, and we've got the auditory area. And the answers are located in the parietal lobe, an area of the occipital lobe, located in the temporal lobe, or a region in the frontal lobe. Okay, so where is the motor area? The motor area is in the... Which region? Frontal. Yes, frontal lobe, good. The visual area is found in the back, which is the occipital, good. Somatosensory, that is in the parietal, good, I got it right. And the auditory is located in the temporal. Yes, well done, 4 for 4. Here we go. How many of the questions did you get correct out of 6? What rating did you get? And there we go. Thank you for joining the lesson today. Today was lesson 2, localization of function in the brain evaluation. Be sure to write up your notes for next lesson. Well done, my neo-psychologist. Great job today. Keep up the brilliant work. I've been Mr. Neo. God bless and peace.
I'm feeling like Will. I feel like a prince. I'm feeling myself. I'm loaded with bills. Cause I wasn't blessed with no Uncle Phil. Don't know how it feels. I wanted to flex. They told me to chill. I'm making a flip. My life is a flick. Now load up the film.